Welcome to The Budding Writer. This podcast offers storytelling, fan fiction, and original short stories from new writers. I'm your narrator, Shayna Armand. This is how it works. When you hear this sound, the story begins, and when you hear it again, the story has ended. Good morning, good day, good afternoon, and good evening, my fellow fan fictionites. I am back from my little hiatus way earlier than planned. Just to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly, I thought I was going to be doing an updated recording of a very successful novel. Unfortunately, I received a manuscript riddled with errors. Turns out it was a scam to get a lower priced bootleg of this very pricey audiobook. The good news is loopholes are awesome and I was able to get out of the contract. I don't have my name associated with fraud, and I learned being a grammar Nazi saved my big patootie. As a welcome back, I'm going to give you a fan fiction that is two for the price of one. Marvel Cinematic Universe meets the Dresden Files. Unless you're living under a rock, the Marvel Universe needs no introduction. Our story involves Bucky Barnes right after the blip at the end of Avengers Infinity War. If you're not familiar with Harry Dresden, believe me, you are missing out. In 2000, Jim Butcher released a little novel entitled Stormfront about an American wizard named Harry who was just trying to make ends meet as a professional wizard in the windy city of Chicago. 17 novels, several awards, and one very Canadian season of a TV series, Jim is still going strong with the action-packed adventures of Harry Dresden. Now let's just kick back and enjoy this little sidetrack into Crossover Town. Winter Nights by Loris_Nobles. Bucky woke up somewhere cold, if waking up was the right term at all. He didn't have the words for whatever it was that had happened, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. He certainly didn't have the luxury of time for an existential crisis at the moment. How and why he was still alive were questions to ponder later. Right now, all he knew was that he needed to go back to the fight. Given that this place couldn't have been any more different from Wakanda, that was going to prove difficult. He was standing in a snowy forest. It wasn't the kind of muddy, compacted snow that people or even animals had walked on, but the sparkling blue-white kind that looked very, very new, and it reached almost up to his knees. There was a deep, heavy silence all around. The naked branches on the trees were perfectly still. It was one of the most beautiful places Bucky had ever seen. He also knew, deep in his bones, that it was dangerous. Perhaps it was because of that, or perhaps he was still running on adrenaline from the battle, but he couldn't stop his knee-jerk reaction when he heard the crunch of footsteps behind him. He turned around and threw a punch at whoever was dumb enough to sneak up to him. It was like hitting a force field. What the hell? I could ask you the same, said the man standing in front of him. He was very tall, all angles, and he wore a long leather duster. One of his arms was raised as if he was holding up a shield, and in the other he held a long wooden staff. You always greet people like this? Only when they show up on my six, he replied. He relaxed his stance, however. If the guy wasn't looking for trouble, maybe he could help, or at least tell him where they were. The stranger lowered his arm as well. Good old-fashioned paranoia. I can relate. Weirdly enough, that made Bucky relax for real. At least enough to ask the most pressing question in his mind at the moment. Do you know what this place is? Wait, you're not from here? The man narrowed his eyes at Bucky. Are you human? Last I checked, he sighed. He didn't like the implications of that question at all. So, am I on a different planet then? Well, not quite. It's a magical realm. Sure, why not? A magic. Before he could finish that thought, he heard a series of clicking sounds coming from his arm. Then it simply stopped working. Just like that. Bucky stared at his limp hand, confused, and tried to twitch his fingers. Nothing. What? Oh, great. The stranger groaned. He looked somewhat guilty, which made no sense. That's not armor, is it? Prosthetic, why? Because that's on me, then. Hi, Harry Dresden. I'm a wizard. It said something about Bucky's life that, at this point, he didn't even think that was weird. He jumped right to the pragmatic conclusion instead. Great. Then can you send me home? I can try, but I don't want to make any promises. Depends on where home is and how you got here. I'm not sure how I got here. That's the problem. We were fighting in Wakanda, and then we lost. I don't know what Thanos did exactly. He frowned, staring at his hands, the hands that he had just seen turn to dust moments ago. It made no sense at all. It was terrible to think about, but I think I might be dead. I doubt it. I could probably tell if you were a ghost, said Dresden. His tone was reassuring, or tried to, but suddenly there was something closed off about his expression. You still look like you know a lot more than you're telling. Well, of course, I'm a wizard. There was a short pause, but Bucky refused to acknowledge the sad attempt at a joke. So Dresden sighed and moved on. Look, this is hard to explain. First of all, yes, I can take you out of the Nevernever and into the mortal world. But it's going to be my mortal world, and I'm pretty sure it's not the same as yours. How the hell would you know that? We don't have a Wakanda. He was still hiding stuff. Bucky was certain of that. He could also tell that pushing the subject right now wasn't going to help. He pinched the bridge of his nose and tried to figure out what to do, or at least ask, next. Right, he said after a second. Would going to your mortal world help? I don't know if it'd get you closer to yours, Dresden admitted, but it's going to be a lot safer than staying here, and I'll have access to information that might help. Looks like my best choice, Bucky agreed. His only choice, more likely. He wasn't very confident about it, but at least it gave him the illusion of a little control. How do we do this? Dresden smiled at him, more than a little smugly. Then he did something with his staff that Bucky didn't understand. A moment later, it was as if a doorway had opened in midair. On the other side, a cityscape was clearly visible. As much as Bucky would have liked to keep his cool, he knew he looked impressed. He couldn't help it. That's Chicago, Dresden said. Coming? Right. Why not? Bucky shrugged to himself and followed him through the magical door. This was his life now. They stepped out into a quiet corner, without any other people nearby. Only a stray cat stared at them for a moment before getting on its way again. Bucky looked around, curious. The way they had come through was simply gone. There was nothing but a wall behind them. It's a bit disorienting the first few times, I know, Dresden told him. But don't worry. From now on, it's just good old-fashioned walking. Look, Bucky said, trying very hard not to roll his eyes. I get the impulse to show off, but my life was crazy enough already, and you wouldn't believe what the last couple of days have been like. I don't want to be impressed. I just want an explanation. Dresden looked almost disappointed by that, but to his credit, he got over it pretty quickly. All right, he agreed, but not here. I know a place where we can talk without anything bothering us. Fair enough. They didn't have to walk very far. That was good for Bucky's impatience. He didn't say anything else until they arrived, since he didn't want any more distractions. The wizard seemed to get the hint. After a few silent minutes, Bucky found himself standing at a building's entrance and looking in. The pub where Dresden had taken him didn't exactly make Bucky feel safe and at ease. It was a nice place, sure enough, even though the apparently random placement of the columns and fans made it look messy. He figured most people wouldn't mind having a couple of beers there. The problem was, he wasn't fond of the idea of getting into a smallish underground room with no good exit routes. Dresden wasn't kidding about sharing his paranoia, it seemed, because he caught on right away just from Bucky stalling for a second near the door. I know what you're thinking, he said. Doesn't look like a great place to be when a fight breaks. But that's the thing. Fights don't break here at Max. It's neutral territory. What if someone decides they don't care about that? Mac takes his neutrality very seriously. Bucky wasn't entirely convinced, but he also knew when he wasn't going to get any clearer answers. He followed Dresden into the pub. They greeted the owner, a big man who merely nodded at them and continued with his work. Bucky liked him already. He picked the free table that made him the least nervous, even though none of the choices were very good. The setup of the furniture was weird, so weird that it had to be on purpose. But whatever method there was to this madness, it was very different from the priorities he was used to. He settled for the best compromise he could find between having his back covered and keeping his eyes on the front door. Dresden didn't comment on it, which was nice of him. He just sat down on the chair in front of Bucky's. Mac approached them with a couple of beer bottles, left them on the table, and walked away again without a word. You must have a lot of questions, the wizard said as soon as they were alone. Well, as alone as they could be in a semi-crowded pub anyway. Lots. There's a really pressing one right now, though, Bucky said. You introduced yourself very early on, but you never asked my name. That seemed to take Dresden by surprise. He tried to hide it, but Bucky didn't miss his surprise blink. Well, I was just... I'm not dumb, Dresden, he interrupted. You know who I am. Not the same world, my ass. It's not the same world. That's how I know who you are in the first place. Look, it's complicated. Try me. They stared at each other for a short moment. Dresden lowered his gaze. He shook his head, chugged some of his beer, and sighed. Fine, he said. I was trying not to give you an existential crisis right off the bat, but fine. You mentioned Wakanda and Thanos. That doesn't just tell me you're not from around here. It tells me that I already know quite a bit about your world. You have that cool metal arm I just broke, and I found you smack in the middle of winter. It really wasn't that hard to add 2 plus 2 from there. You still aren't making any sense. If it was really a different world, how would you even know about any of that? Dresden looked very intently at his bottle of beer and said, with a perfectly straight face, I read it in a comic book. Bucky's first instinct was, of course, to tell the wizard to stop bullshitting him. But then he looked at Dresden's face. He was still avoiding his gaze. And there was this sudden sinking feeling. Oh, God. Please don't have an existential crisis. That's not my area of expertise at all. He couldn't hold back a nervous laugh. It probably made Dresden's worries about him having a mental breakdown even worse. But he couldn't help it. This whole situation was insane. He took a large gulp of his beer, even though it wouldn't have much of an effect on him. It was the principle of the thing. Earlier today, he said at last, and then he had to take a moment because he was laughing again before he went on. Huh. Earlier today, I was fighting aliens with a space raccoon, and I thought shit couldn't get any weirder. In my defense, said Dresden, I was hoping to find a way to break it to you gently. Yeah, to be fair, I don't think that's possible. Right, the wizard tapped his fingers on the table. Mr. Barnes? Bucky, he corrected automatically. Dresden, well, Harry now, he supposed. Looked kind of relieved. Bucky, he agreed. Look, there are people who can probably help you get back home, but I'm going to have to make some phone calls, and it'll take some time until we can meet. I know you're in a hurry, and I'm used to working fast, but you're stuck at least until tonight or so. Yeah, I figured as much, Bucky sighed. All right. One problem at a time. I need a sling for the arm that'll keep annoying me. We'll ask Mac. I'm sure he'll lend us something. But first, lunch. As if on cue, Mac showed up bringing 2 huge plates of steak and fries. It was really satisfying in that way the simplest meals often are. Bucky felt much better prepared to face the future now that he had eaten something. So these people you need to talk to, he asked after a while. Are they wizards too? One of them is, Harry replied. The others are harder to explain. Really? How much worse can it get? Well, I wouldn't say worse, but it's pretty weird. First there's Bob, he said. He's a spirit of intellect. Think of him as a kind of snarky, skull-shaped encyclopedia. Bucky nodded. It sounded weird, yes, but also like a reasonable way to get information. For certain values of reasonable. And who else? I asked. Then, Harry said, and there's a barely noticeable moment of hesitation, we should find out if Winter has some answers. Wait, I thought Winter was a place. Bucky interrupted, confused. You said it's where we met. It's a lot of things, and your day's about to get even weirder because there's no good way to say this. How much do you know about the fairy courts? Bucky stared at him for a moment. Are you kidding me? Come on, after all the stuff I've told you already, why would I make this up? The worst part, Bucky thought, was realizing that he had a good point there. Fairies were almost tame after how the rest of this conversation had been going. Still, the whole situation was starting to add up. He was just doing his best not to look or sound as overwhelmed as he felt, but he could feel a headache coming, and it must have shown. Sorry, said Harry. I think I might be doing that infamous wizard thing where we talk too much all at once. It's not that bad, Bucky lied. I guess I just need some time to process it. Harry gave him a thoughtful look, then nodded. Tell you what, I can go make those phone calls and I'll tell you if I found something useful when I come back. You'll be fine here, and if you get bored, there's always beer. Bucky took another sip of his beer. Once again, he didn't have much of a choice. Might as well roll with it. Sounds like a plan. Staying at Mac's for a while was actually kind of nice. Nobody bothered him, but they didn't act scared of him or give him weird looks either. Who knew the kind of people they were used to seeing in this place? Harry had paid before leaving, which was just as well, since he didn't have any money on him. That hadn't exactly felt like a priority that morning. It also meant he didn't have to be completely embarrassed about asking Mac for something to use as a sling. Wait, was all the pub owner said. Then he walked into the kitchen. A few moments later, he came back bringing a clean dishcloth. That worked just fine. Bucky quickly tied it up and, with his limp arm out of the way, this wouldn't be too different from just not having it. It was very light, too, so it didn't bother him. Shuri was good at what she did. He wondered how Shuri would react if she found out there was magic out there that could make technology stop working. Then, of course, that led to wondering if she was still alive at all. So Bucky forced his brain to change the subject. He figured that a distraction might work better for that purpose. Is there anything I can do? He asked Mac. Help in the kitchen or something? I can manage with just one hand. After a moment's consideration, Mac nodded. Bucky followed him into the kitchen in complete silence. He really liked this guy. There wasn't a lot to do, but it looked like it might still be enough to keep Bucky busy until Harry returned. Mostly he kept things in order while Mac worked on preparing the dishes. It was the kind of menial task he had grown used to in recent times, and he'd come to enjoy it. That was something else that made him so angry about this whole thing, really. He was doing fine. He was safe and content, and he had friends, so of course some alien asshole had to show up and ruin everything. And now he was stuck in a completely different place where he couldn't even help to stop him. Even if he did manage to return home, who knew what he'd find there? Nothing good, he was sure. You'll get help, said Mac after a while, out of nowhere. Or so it felt to Bucky, at least. Maybe he just looked that bad. Sorry? Dresden and his friends, Mac explained. Can't promise everything will work out, but they'll help. It might not have sounded like much, but it was hope. Bucky decided to hold on to it. By the time Harry returned, it was night already. Mac's pub was still full of people. Some of them had to be there for the food and the excellent beer, sure. But Bucky was starting to get the impression that the pub was also some kind of refuge. There was a lot of quiet, low-key weirdness in the room. He liked it. He felt like he could fit right in. Still, he hoped the wizard had come back with some kind of information that meant he wouldn't need to. Any news? Bucky asked, as he went to join him at one of the tables. Mac had given them a couple of beers, which could be just a nice gesture, or it could mean he thought they'd need them. Good and bad, Harry said. Want the short version first? Yes, please. You can go full wizard at me after I know the basics. Harry snorted, but didn't argue the wording. All right, good news first. You weren't kidnapped by fairies. I've asked around my winter friends. If it had been anyone from there, we'd know. Then how did I get here? That's the bad news, he replied. I still haven't figured that out. But hey, knowing Winter didn't bring you here on purpose is really good news. Bucky frowned, thoughtful. There was something about the way he phrased that rubbed him the wrong way. I'm not sure I like that on purpose part. Harry nodded and passed him one of the beer bottles. Bob thinks maybe you did end up here because of fairy magic, even if it was an accident. You left your own world because of whatever it was that Thanos did, but because of the Winter connection, you ended up in the Nevernever. Bucky narrowed his eyes. You know that's just a code name, right? I'm not so sure, actually, Harry said. When I first met you, I thought you were she. So that's why you asked me if I was a human. Bucky realized. I thought you were just guessing alien. Now that would be new even for me, which would be bad because then I couldn't help you. Seriously, you're in the least worst case scenario right now. If you say so. Hey, at least I've got a lead. We know this has to do with you being the Winter Soldier. Not anymore, Bucky interrupted. It must have come out as more forceful than he intended, because Harry raised his hands in a placating gesture. Fair enough. Were then. Just hear me out. Mortals can have connections to the fairy courts. I'm not sure what's going on in your case exactly, but it's got to be relatively strong if it led you to the middle of winter. And, well, to me, Harry snorted and raised his beer as if for a toast. No judgment here, you know. I'm the winter knight after all. Team unwilling hitmen. Bucky was starting to feel like his head was spinning. Harry did sound like he had a lot of experience with this. All of this. Apparently, and not just the weird magic part. Instead of reassuring him, it almost made things worse. It meant he was probably right. But it can't. Look, it's just not possible. There aren't even fairies in my world. That you know of. Even if there were, he insisted, even though by this point he was half sure that he was just being stubborn for no reason. Hydra wouldn't get involved with that. It's not their style. It's exactly their style. Look, don't think Fae as in cute Victorian flower drawings. Think Fae as in Odin. As much as he hated to admit it, Bucky didn't have a good argument against that. The whole thing had started with that stupid Tesseract after all. Oh, was all he managed to say at first, and then, well, shit. That's right, which is why we need to get you the hell out of here as soon as possible, Harry said. Bucky must have given him a look because he sighed and explained himself further. Yes, we already knew it was urgent, but it's worse. There's a very high chance that you do have some form of winter magic in you, like it or not. The courts are big on balance, and there's no summer soldier, so if summer figures out you're around here, they're gonna be pissed. And when fairies are mad at you, they really don't care if it's actually your fault or not. It sounded pretty bad, even for Bucky's frankly skewed standards. He finished the rest of his beer in just one go. So, he asked at last, do you know how to send me back? I know someone who knows, and I already called him. He'll meet us in the bird sanctuary in a couple of hours. Seriously? A park in the middle of night? That's not suspicious at all. I promise it makes sense, said Harry. We're going to meet one of the most powerful wizards in the world and ask him to open an interdimensional portal. Things might get pretty spectacular. It's better if there aren't any bystanders. Bucky grumbled a little to himself. That does make sense. I still don't like it. It's our best shot, Harry insisted. Possibly our only one. If there's anyone who can send you back to your world, it's the gatekeeper. Hey, I didn't say no, he pointed out. He was far too aware that it was the only chance they had. Do we get to at least have dinner first? Of course. No interdimensional travel on an empty stomach. Mac didn't quite wish them luck before they left, but he nodded at them solemnly, which in his case was pretty much the same. Bucky couldn't help but feel a bit nostalgic already. If everything went well tonight, he'd go back home and never see the place again. And if it didn't go well, then he'd have much bigger problems. The best thing he could do for the time being was focus on the immediate situation. He was sure the sanctuary was a nice place in daylight and better circumstances, but right now it was only putting him on edge. Every noise, every movement in the shadows felt like a threat, and the wizard they were supposed to meet wasn't here yet. Are you sure he's coming? Bucky asked. He'll be here. Harry spoke with conviction, and he nodded as he did so, but it was really telling that he wasn't looking at Bucky when he replied. He was checking out the place instead, either because he shared Bucky's worries about the potential danger, or because he was hoping to see that gatekeeper guy, if he was really trustworthy, and there was no reason to think otherwise. Then something had to be keeping him away, something strong or complicated enough to stop a powerful wizard. Bucky didn't even want to imagine what that could be. As it turned out, he didn't have the time to dwell on thoughts anyway. The hushed sounds of nature all around him suddenly turned into thundering hooves and breaking branches. There was no warning for the change. That was not an animal getting louder as it approached them. It was as if someone had dropped an already galloping horse only a few yards away. Given his recent experience with magic and portals, Bucky wouldn't have been surprised if that was exactly the case, except for the part where it wasn't a horse at all. The creature charging towards them only looked like one in the most superficial way. It was bigger, much stronger, and covered in black scales. And then there was that huge serrated horn. Bucky barely had time to jump out of its way. He rolled up into a crouch and saw Harry standing with his back to him, his arm raised like a shield again, just like when they first met. When the creature inevitably charged again, it stopped and bounced as if it had hit a wall. The problem was that it just made it angry enough to keep trying. I hate unicorns, the wizard muttered. That's a unicorn? Probably. It could be something else shape-shifting into a unicorn, he said. Either way, it's trouble. No shit. Bucky would have loved to have a functional left arm right now, or a gun. That'd be even better. Instead, he picked up the biggest of the broken branches the creature had left lying around, and hoped it would do. How do we beat it? We don't. Summer could take it as a provocation even if they started it. I don't want to take that risk. Harry paused for a moment, then turned to look at him over his shoulder. Move aside. When I drop the shield, I'm going to try something dumb. Story of his life, Bucky thought. At least this time he was getting some warning. When the unicorn started the following time, Harry lowered his arm to drop the barrier. Then he opened a way. Bucky wouldn't have needed to stand aside. The creature, unable to slow down in time, went straight through the opening between realms. Harry closed it again immediately and sighed in relief. Can't believe that worked, Bucky said. Never underestimate the Looney Tunes school of fighting. That stupid joke made Bucky laugh a lot harder than it should have. Maybe it was the sudden stress relief. Yeah, he'd blame it on that. You think it'll come back? He asked. Once he managed to regain his breath, Harry shook his head. That should send the message that we're not engaging. And even if they send it back, it'll take them a while. It should be enough for us to keep with the gatekeeper. If he shows up at all, Bucky didn't say, which was just as well, because then a bright orange portal opened in front of him, and two men stepped out. About time, Harry muttered, but he was smiling. Forgive the delay, one of the newcomers said. I had an unexpected meeting on the way here. The gatekeeper looked, well, the way Bucky would have expected a wizard to look. He supposed it was probably the robes. He looked, to put it simply, like a badass. He was very tall, even taller than Harry, and one of his eyes was a silver ball surrounded by scars. The man standing next to him was another obvious wizard, this one wearing a long red cloak. He was also the reason they were late, but didn't look apologetic at all about it. It's been a complicated day for everyone, was all he said. Tell me about it, Harry said, and Bucky got the impression that he was trying and failing not to sound impressed. Doctor Strange? You know this guy? He's from your world, said the gatekeeper, which is fortunate. Traveling with a magic user, it will be easier to make sure you reach the right place and time. Right, so that was a way subtler way of saying Harry knew him from comic books. It didn't seem to bother Strange at all, but it still gave Bucky a headache to think about it. So he focused on the most important part. You really can send me back then? I can, the gatekeeper assured him. And I have to. It's part of my duties to keep intruders out, even accidental ones. So you won't get into any trouble for helping me? Bucky said, mostly thinking aloud. Wizard bureaucracy sounded more and more needlessly complicated the more he found out about it. The gatekeeper smiled at him, amused. Precisely. It's in everyone's best interest, yours included, if I send you home, both of you. It's in our world's best interest, too. We need... Strange stopped talking mid-sentence, stared at him as if seeing him for the first time, and frowned. What happened to your arm? Magic, Harry replied before Bucky could get a word in. Obviously. Strange didn't seem to find it obvious at all. In fact, he looked kind of horrified. Your magic interferes with technology? That's barbaric. Hey now, you come into my universe. Guys, Bucky interrupted, sometimes it was nice to still have some old Winter Soldier cred. They did indeed shut up and look at him. Priorities? Right. Harry raised his hand in a placating gesture. I'll kick your ass later, Strange. You can try. I like you a lot better when you're just ink. Guys, yes, of course. This time it was Strange who spoke first. I was going to say we need to go back and help, right now. Thanos is winning. There's no easy way to say this. Half the universe is gone. It was as if time stood still. Half the universe. That was. It was too big a concept to even be properly shocked. Bucky closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to calm down. It didn't work. Hell's bells, Harry whispered beside him. All attempts at levity gone now. We can't fix this, Bucky said. He felt like he was going to start laughing from the tension. What good could we do, even if we get back? It will help, the gatekeeper interrupted. His voice was so authoritative all of a sudden that Bucky almost believed him. He really wanted to, in any case. How? You will be back, he replied. You two will be living proof that it can be fixed, that there is a solution, even for this. But we don't know what it is. We do, said Strange. I've seen the future where we win. We're on the right track. And that's all you're saying about it, isn't it? Strange's only answer was a small smile, half apologetic, half knowing. The gatekeeper was going for the cryptic smile routine, too. Harry, on the other hand, just sighed and gave Bucky a friendly pat on the shoulder. Looks like you are starting to understand wizards, he said. If it makes you feel better, I have no idea what's going on either. That didn't quite make Bucky laugh, but he couldn't hold back a tiny smile, and that was an improvement already. He certainly appreciated the intention. Just jump in and hope for the best, huh? He chuckled. At least that's nothing new. I'm glad you think so, because there's no time to lose, the gatekeeper said. An explanation was in order, but if we wait much longer, we'll be pushing our luck. I don't want to meet another unicorn, Bucky agreed. He turned towards Harry and offered his hand. Pity we didn't meet in better circumstances. I think we could have had fun. Harry shook it and grinned. Hey, you never know. I might figure out how to go and annoy you guys over there. I've always wanted to meet Spider-Man. Bucky was a moment away of telling him he had terrible taste. Then he didn't, because that would amount to admitting that Spider-Man had kicked his ass. He'd like to keep at least a little bit of his dignity intact. The gatekeeper saved him from having to come up with a suitable reply for that. Are you ready? He asked. Bucky nodded. Whatever the gatekeeper did then, it didn't look like when Harry opened away. It was less like a window to somewhere else and more like a tear in the fabric of the universe itself. He didn't see his own world on the other side. In fact, he didn't see a place at all, not even space. Instead, there was a dizzying mess of abstract shapes and colors he had no names for. You sure we'll find our way from here? We will, Strange assured him. We're still anchored to our realm. If your connection with Winter was enough to get you to the Nevernever, imagine how strong the pull to our original world will be. Bucky didn't ask how he knew that. He mentally filed it as a wizard thing. Then he didn't need to understand. But it was reassuring in a way. It seemed clear that these people weren't just improvising. He was going home. All right, he squared his shoulders. Let's do this. Good luck, Harry told him. One last time, Bucky looked at him and grinned. He nodded at the gatekeeper, too, who nodded back. There was something about his expression that made him feel confident somehow, as if walking into some indescribable realm in between universes was no big deal. This would work, he realized. He couldn't know how or why, but it would work. He was ready. Just jump in and hope for the best. He stepped into the portal. Well, I don't need to tell you that I was actually kind of surprised that Doctor Strange showed up at the end, but I am ready for a Dresden Strange wizard off. So if somebody feels like writing that, go ahead and submit it to me. If you like this story and want to read more by Loris_Nobilis, their work is available on archiveofourown.org. That's archiveofourown.org. Are you a budding writer? Do you have a fan fiction or original story you'd like to hear on our podcast? Go ahead and contact us at thebuddingwriterpodcast@gmail.com. That's thebuddingwriterpodcast@gmail.com. If you're looking for our submission guidelines, they are also on our website, thebuddingwriterpodcast.com. Thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me every Friday for new stories by budding writers. My name is Shayna Arman, and I hope all of your stories have happy endings.